In 1964, the United States government declared war on poverty. America, the world's most prosperous nation, was afflicted with poverty in the midst of plenty. The issue of poverty tugged at the heartstrings and created national indignation among our citizens. It also provided justification for politicians to institute massive new federal spending programs. Few wars have been declared with as much propaganda as was the war on poverty. President Johnson had stated, "There are millions of Americans, 1/5 of our people, who have not shared in the abundance which has been granted to most of us, and on whom the gates of opportunity have been closed." The president did not explain how he concluded that all those with incomes below $3,000 lacked opportunity. He also did not mention that included in the 30 million persons with incomes below $3,000, over 11 million were children, several million more were elderly or lived on farms, and another million were serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. But poverty was the hottest political issue of the year, and President Johnson had stated in January of 1964, "We are going to try to take all of the money that we think is unnecessarily being spent and take it from the haves and give it to the have-nots that need it so much." The War on Poverty was the outgrowth of a book by Michael Harrington, The Other America, published in 1962, which dealt at length on vivid and pathetic descriptions of the poor. Harrington is credited by friend and foe alike as being the father of the War on Poverty. Nothing was said, however, about Harrington's membership in the youth arm of the Socialist Workers' Party, cited by the Attorney General of the United States as subversive and communist on page 152 of the federal government's Guide to Subversive Organizations. Harrington is a frank and avowed Marxist who has, as recently as September 10, 1967, at the third annual Conference of Socialist Scholars, advocated violence, if necessary, to establish a Marxist-socialist government in the United States. At that time, he was, and still is, a top federal official in the War on Poverty. Remarkably, in spite of the fact Harrington has never attempted to hide his Marxist beliefs, nor his past membership in a communist party, neither the politicians nor the mass media have been alarmed by this fact, nor have they questioned his aims nor his methods. When the necessary legislation cleared Congress, Sergeant Shriver, brother-in-law of the late Robert F. Kennedy, was appointed Commanding General of the War on Poverty. His special assistant was Marxist Michael Harrington. Shriver borrowed Adam Yarmolinsky, who bore the title of Special Assistant to Secretary of Defense, from Robert McNamara to serve on an anti-poverty task force to design the War on Poverty. Yarmolinsky's Russian-born father and writer-mother have authored many tracts for the Communist Party since 1930. Yarmolinsky himself was president of the Young Communist League while at Harvard and editor of the campus communist newspaper, The Yardling. When questioned by a Senate investigating committee in 1962 about his Young Communist League activities, Yarmolinsky stated, "They believed, and I was inclined to believe, that a so-called communist government was a desirable end." Before becoming a special assistant to former Secretary of Defense McNamara, Yarmolinsky was an officer of the extreme left-wing Fund for the Republic, where he authored a vicious attack on the FBI and congressional committees which investigate communism. The War on Poverty, then, was largely the creation of two men, Yarmolinsky and Harrington, who have long and extensive communistic backgrounds, which they have never repudiated. It is not surprising, then, that there have been literally tens of thousands of complaints from irate citizens about political activities financed by the War on Poverty, about the disappearance of large sums of money, the use of federal funds for the most radical sort of unionizing, organization of boycotts, rent strikes and demonstrations by War on Poverty workers, and brawling, drinking, knifing, killing, sexual assaults, rioting, use of narcotics, and extortion by War on Poverty Job Corps trainees. Although these happenings are all important, in this film we are primarily concerned with the Office of Economic Opportunity's role in the rioting, burning, murdering, and looting which has taken place in over 150 American cities, killing hundreds of people and inflicting well over $1 billion in damages. These riots began in 1964, simultaneously with the first shot in the War on Poverty. The evidence shows that this is far from being a coincidence. We have been told by the President's Special Commission to investigate riots that the riots are caused primarily by poverty and white racism. This in spite of the fact that there is less poverty in America than at any time in history, and that such repeated and massive riots have never before occurred in our country, even at the depths of the Great Depression, when there really was extensive poverty. We are told that in spite of the fact that America has spent almost $1 trillion in the last 30 years on welfare, and we are now spending at the federal, state, county, and local levels well over $55 billion a year on welfare, that this is totally insufficient, and that if welfare spending is not drastically increased, America's cities will be burned to the ground by the desperate and disillusioned poor. The question is, what role has the Office of Economic Opportunity, the OEO, played in the riots? Since no thorough investigation has yet been conducted by Congress to establish the role of the OEO in the riots, what information is available has been turned up primarily on a local basis by diligent and anxious citizens, a few concerned congressmen, and congressional committees investigating other subjects. The evidence which we will submit to you is all from the public record to substantiate allegations made by congressmen, chiefs of police, mayors, and city councilmen that the war on poverty has become the weapon through which chaos and destruction are fulminated in our cities at taxpayers' expense. The U.S. News and World Report of January 31st, 1966, reports that revolutionaries and new leftist radicals are more active than ever before in our nation's history. In the cities, on the college campuses, among Negroes north and south, they talk revolution. The magazine states that their goal is to, quote, latch on to the poverty war funds and use the money to stir trouble, end quote. Such radicals have found unprecedented opportunities in the war on poverty. As official Communist Party spokesman Henry Winston stated after returning from a briefing in Moscow, quote, today the Economic Opportunity Act has already become the basis for organizing in the slums and ghetto communities, and it offers the point of departure for helping to rally the rank and file millions to a mass movement, end quote. So arrogantly confident are these revolutionaries that they will be protected by friends running the war on poverty, they gloat publicly that it is the OEO which is supporting them. At the third annual conference of socialist scholars held in New York on September 9th and 10th, 1967, Mr. Stanley Aronowitz bragged, quote, the war on poverty has given employment to organizers. Subsidized revolution, the war on poverty. The first major riot to occur after passage of the war on poverty was the Watts Rebellion, which serves as a prototype for subsequent insurrections in America's urban centers. Volumes of sociological double talk have been written to try to explain away those tragic days in August 1965. What all these studies ignored was the fact that 4 days before the Holocaust began, hearings were held in Watts by Congressman Augustus Hawkins, ostensibly to determine whether government officials or the poor should run the local war on poverty programs. This proved to be a cover for a pep rally for the upcoming riot. Authors Patty Newman and Joyce Winger, who attended the phony hearings, describe what they heard. Quote, a tape recording was made of the entire proceedings, but no tape recording could possibly convey to you the atmosphere that was created, the tone that was generated by the manner in which information was presented and questions were asked, end quote. The phrases of revolution flew like swallows returning to Capistrano. Phrases like, quote, you are being used, and you must organize and fight for your rights, and you must not let them continue to take advantage of you, and demand what is rightfully yours. The people in the audience got the message. 4 days later, Watts was ablaze with fire and hatred. A West Coast congressman was quoted by nationally syndicated columnist Ruth Montgomery as declaring, quote, "I have little doubt that the hearing is what triggered the riots in Watts. Giving those people the idea they were being mistreated was the spark that set off the blast." End quote. Detective James Harris of the Los Angeles Police Department later told the House Committee on Un-American Activities that the Communist Party of Southern California caused trouble before, during, and after the riots in Watts. Why would a United States congressman deliberately trigger the riot, which would cause the death of 35 people and do $200 million in damages? Augustus Hawkins, who serves on the House Committee on Education and Labor, which controls the War on Poverty's purse strings, was, according to the sworn testimony of the Communist Party's former West Coast organizer John Leach, recruited into the Communist Party by Leach. Hawkins has been an official sponsor of the Young Communist League, an instructor at 2 schools sponsored by the Communist Party, and has served on the fundraising committee for People's World, an official organ of the Communist Party. The Joint Fact-Finding Committee of the 57th California Legislature, of which Hawkins was a member, reported, quote, "Hawkins has consistently followed the Communist Party line," end quote. The mass media has spent no more time informing the American public about Hawkins' thoroughly documented communist background than it has the backgrounds of Harrington and Yarmolinsky. The San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley area is well known as a hotbed of Marxist agitation and provides many examples of the use of the war on poverty by subversives. For example, John Ross of the pro-Peking Progressive Labor Party served on the Anti-Poverty Board in San Francisco. And Howard Harowitz, former president of the local chapter of the Communist Du Bois Clubs, served on a similar anti-poverty board in Berkeley. When the financial publication Barron's dared to challenge the wisdom of permitting such communist involvement, the OEO declared, quote, "This is a classic example of brutal character assassination." What was the character assassination? Were these men not associated with the war on poverty? Well, the OEO admitted they were serving on its policy-making boards, but as volunteers working for love, not money. The OEO's only defense for using members of these communist organizations was that, quote, "Neither of the above organizations is included on the Attorney General's list of subversive organizations." What is not mentioned is that the Attorney General's office stopped years ago adding groups to its list of subversive organizations. That one is an avowed Chinese communist doesn't make him subversive or disqualify him from the poverty program, in the opinion of the OEO. Labor columnist Victor Russell claims that the poverty offices are absolutely riddled with such revolutionaries, stating, quote, "The OEO and thousands of its tiny, sometimes storefront headquarters are loaded with literature and promoters of street action. Some of the latter are of the New Left, the Independent Maoists, the Trotskyites, the pro-Peking Progressive Labor Party, youth, and even Muscovite Communist Party activists, and it is the fashion to hire these young revolutionaries. They zero in on the poor who have been told to organize themselves and run the poverty program. The poor don't even know that their districts have been colonized by the militant factions." A typical example of the war on poverty's use of revolutionaries is the case of Bobby Seale. At the same time, he helped lead 41 other members of the Black Panther guerrilla force in an armed invasion of the California State Legislature in May 1967. Seale was earning $422 a month as a family counselor at the North Oakland Poverty Center. Another of the leaders of that guerrilla group was Mark Comfort, who worked for the OEO's Neighborhood Youth Corps. For years, People's World, West Coast communist newspaper, has been promoting and publicizing Comfort, who married the daughter of 2 identified communists. One of Comfort's most recent conflicts with law enforcement authorities came when he was arrested for running guns in Alabama. The participation of poverty workers in agitations and demonstrations on behalf of the Viet Cong deserve a federal investigation in itself. One example of the use of federal funds for this purpose occurred on July 19, 1966, when a group of Black Power activists held a peace rally on the steps of San Francisco's City Hall. A mass mailing from the Sutter Street headquarters of the War on Poverty urged attendance at the rally. The Sutter Street office of the OEO is operated by Wilfred Ussery, a revolutionary black nationalist and National Corps official who was earning $12,000 a year to fight poverty, capitalism, and whitey. The poverty warriors attempt to incite revolution not only in the cities but also in rural areas. In California's fertile San Joaquin Valley, Cesar Chavez, with his United Farm Workers of America, is avowedly promoting redistribution of the land, a la Mao Zedong. The California State Senate's Committee on Un-American Activities has described Chavez's movement as being surrounded with communists. But this has not stopped Chavez from obtaining support from an assortment of war on poverty programs running into millions of dollars. Just as the OEO has financed the avowed Chavez revolutionaries, it is also deeply involved in a Mexican-American revolution in New Mexico, headed by Castroite Reyes Tijerina, who has been indicted for attempted murder for his short-lived revolution of June 1967, in which a band of armed pistoleros attacked and captured the courthouse in rural Rio Arriba County. At the time of Tijerina's capture, he was being chauffeured by Uvaldo Velasquez, a war on poverty worker employed by Home Education Livelihood Program, HELP. Others in HELP, which has a $250,000 appropriation in the war on poverty, also joined Tijerina, providing legal aid for the revolutionaries. HELP Director Mercury told newsmen, quote, "Some of our people are obviously members of Tijerina's group." Mercury then announced that he could himself sympathize with the Castroite cause, and he predicted that armed revolutionaries might spread across the entire Southwest. In Denver, Tijerina's chief assistant, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, is a $10,000 a year director of the OEO's Neighborhood Youth Program. When elected chairman of Denver's War on Poverty Incorporated, Gonzalez, who makes no attempt to hide his Marxist beliefs, proclaimed, quote, "I am an agitator and a troublemaker. That's my reputation, and that is what I'm going to be," end quote. On November 5th, 1967, Corky Gonzalez was the featured speaker at a fundraising dinner for the People's World. Recent testimony before the Permanent Investigation Subcommittee has shown that Black Power revolutionaries seized control of a $600,000 war on poverty project in Houston after OEO officials in Washington had advised the project to, quote, "actively involve the dissenters, the agitators, the troublemakers, and the militants." Members of Stokely Carmichael's and Rap Brown's misnamed Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, soon took over the Houston Community Action Project. The project grew out of a wild gun battle on the campus of Texas Southern University, during which students fired on police, killing an officer. Samuel Price, acting director of personnel in the Houston Community Action Project, testified that he had personally seen one room full of guns belonging to the black revolutionaries. 2 of the 5 persons indicted on charges growing out of the battle were employees of the War on Poverty. On July 10, 1967, another Houston War on Poverty program ordered 7 $111 telescopic rifle sights from Washington. The OEO approved the order. When the information reached the public, the War on Poverty tried to claim that the sniper scopes were to be used as microscopes. Not only is this use impossible, but the War on Poverty bureaucrats never mentioned why microscopes weren't ordered in the first place. The Houston War on Poverty group has acquired a quantity of walkie-talkie radios for monitoring police calls. Walkie-talkies are also useful for coordinating riots. In Chicago, War on Poverty funds are being used to hire teenage gang leaders. The idea is that gang problems will be solved by putting their leaders on the federal payroll with a $927,000 grant. After Nashville underwent a riot during the spring of 1967, Nashville Police Captain John Sarace told a Senate investigating committee that the riot was fomented by the violent revolutionaries of SNCC, again subsidized by the OEO. The captain testified that the War on Poverty was supporting a SNCC liberation school, which was teaching Negro children hatred of whites. The school's director, Fred Brooks, was also the Nashville chairman of SNCC. Brooks made his appearance at the scene of the violence in Nashville in style, driving a 1967 Ford station wagon paid for by the War on Poverty. Captain Surace testified that, quote, a number of SNCC leaders who were arrested during the April riots were taught at the school. Among the tactics taught at the school were hatred of the white man, judo tactics, and how to manufacture Molotov cocktails. In a raid on the Nashville SNCC headquarters, police found revolutionary literature and confiscated Molotov cocktails. Barrels of anti-poverty money have poured into Appalachia. On August 12, 1967, a midnight raid on the home of 3 poverty workers produced what Commonwealth's attorney Thomas Ratliff revealed was, quote, a communist library out of this world. He also reported confiscating a written plan on how to take over Pike County and put it in the hands of the poor. Works by Lenin, Marx, Mao Zedong, Castro, and other communist leaders were seized, Ratliff said, along with instructions on how to use weapons and how to fight guerrilla wars. When the 3 poverty warriors were indicted for sedition, their bond was posted by Carl Braden of the Southern Conference Educational Fund. Braden was identified by an undercover FBI agent as a Communist Party organizer in the South. The Southern Conference Educational Fund, SCEF, has been cited as the top communist front in the South by both House and Senate investigating committees. However, the Southern Conference Educational Fund and its chairman, identified communist James Dombrowski, were solicited by the late Robert Kennedy to help fight the war on poverty. Carl Braden and his communist wife Ann were so cocksure of the sympathy of the leadership of the war on poverty that they have not attempted to hide their participation in a Louisville War on Poverty project which received a $28,000 grant. The Bradens signed the Articles of Incorporation, and the address given for the War on Poverty project at 4403 Virginia Avenue was the same address used by their identified Communist Front, SCEF. When a Kentucky congressman asked the War on Poverty bureaucrat who issued the grant if he knew about Ann Braden's participation, the reply was, quote, yes, I know. She is active, very active. The War on Poverty in Washington, D.C. itself is infested with revolutionary types. Before quitting his job to take over leadership of SNCC from Marxist-Leninist Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown was an employee of the War on Poverty in Washington. Needless to say, the press doesn't dwell on the matter of Rap's last employer. Neither does the OEO. At the top of Washington's United Planning Organization, a War on Poverty project, is Hal Witt, who earns $21,000 a year. Witt is the son of Communist Party member Nat Witt, and is himself a joiner of many Communist Front organizations. According to the congressional record of November 14, 1967, the FBI has information that Witt is in close and frequent contact with many members of the Communist Party as well as top financial backers of the party. The Daily Worker of January 10, 1965, advertised a meeting to honor the 40th anniversary of the communist publishing firm International Publishers. Listed as a featured speaker was Marion Barry, now a $1,000 a month consultant for the War on Poverty. Until moving to Washington, D.C. in June of 1965, Barry was head of SNCC's New York office. Barry has said, quote, riot power and rebellion power might make people listen now. In July 1967, the third anniversary of its 1964 riots, Rochester, New York was once again victimized by criminal revolutionaries. City manager Seymour Scher revealed that the local anti-poverty agency had been working, quote, to inflame rather than to calm the riot which led to 2 deaths. The summer of 1967 also brought chaos to Buffalo, where City Councilman Raymond Lewandowski reported that as the riot tensions grew, War on Poverty workers, quote, threatened him with a race riot if he did not agree to their demands. After the riot, Lewandowski stated, quote, the War on Poverty programs are a well-organized conspiracy in which Buffalo's elected representatives are being subjected to threats of riots and intimidation by anti-poverty workers. The granddaddy of all War on Poverty programs is Hair You Act, Hair You meaning Harlem Youth, run by an army of highly paid administrators who have spent more than 100 million tax dollars one of Haryu's triumphs in inciting domestic guerrilla warfare is the Black Arts Repertory Theater, BART, with a grant of $40,000 in federal funds. According to the Associated Press of December 1st, 1965, quote, each night in a makeshift Harlem theater, a group of young Negroes give vent to the hatred of whitey. Chalk-faced Negroes perform roles of whites frequently portrayed as homosexuals, end quote. Bart is the offspring of Negro playwright Leroy Jones. When asked to justify his psychotic anti-white diatribes at taxpayers' expense, Jones stated, quote, I don't see anything wrong with hating white people. Jones has also said, quote, the force we want is 20 million spooks storming America with furious cries and unstoppable weapons. We want actual explosions and actual brutality, end quote. The New York Police Department raided Jones Theater and found an arsenal in the basement, including rifles, pistols, ammunition, and Molotov cocktails. When reporters asked James Kelleher, Deputy Director of Publicity for the OEO, about Jones, he replied, quote, we knew about it when we granted the money, and we have no apologies. The New York Daily News investigated Mobilization for Youth, MFY, a subsidiary of Haryu, and discovered that more than 37 of its employees had subversive or communist backgrounds. The FBI later confirmed these allegations. As usual, the OEO has denied that MFY ever employed Reds, but a committee set up by the New York legislature published a report naming the communist and radical leftists hired by MFY. Another war on poverty activist is Jesse Gray, cited by J. Edgar Hoover as a Communist Party organizer for Harlem. Gray led the Harlem rent strike in 1963 and was a leader in the bloody Harlem riots in 1964. On July 7, 1967, Gray took 2 busloads of Negroes from Harlem and invaded the spectators' gallery of the U.S. House of Representatives, chanting, quote, Rats cause riots. Many of the demonstrators were paid poverty warriors. Gray, who himself is subsidized by the War on Poverty at the rate of $1,000 a month, was instrumental in getting the House to reverse itself and add a $40 million rat control rider to a $1 billion health bill. One reason so many subversives are involved in the New York City War on Poverty is that Robert Schrank, an identified communist, is director of the city's Neighborhood Youth Corps, and Mayor Lindsay not only admitted that such was the case, but bragged about it. As the New York Daily News noted, quote, Robert Laird, Mayor Lindsay's press assistant, said he understood that while Schrank had been a member of the Communist Party for 15 years, he gave up his membership prior to his Mobilization for Youth appointment 3 or 4 years ago. 6 weeks before the bloody battle in Newark on July 1967, Police Commissioner Dominic Spina sent a frantic telegram to then OEO Director Sergeant Shriver stating, quote, I strongly protest the use of resources and manpower from the United Community Corporation, an agency of the Office of Economic Opportunity, for the purpose of fomenting and agitating against the city of Newark. This kind of practice by this anti-poverty agency will undoubtedly lead to riots and anarchy in our city. I request an immediate response, end quote. It took millionaire anti-poverty chief Shriver 19 days to reply to Spina's charges. He denied them. 3 weeks later, the city exploded and the bloodletting began. Poverty workers had been conducting a vicious campaign among the city's Negroes, inflaming them to hatred of whites, renting sound trucks with federal funds, and driving through Negro districts blaring the old communist cry of police brutality. Inflammatory leaflets run off mimeograph machines in the office of Newark's anti-poverty agencies told how to make Molotov cocktails and how to organize riots. Typical of the extraordinary incitations to riot printed at taxpayers' expense was the following declaration, quote, there is going to be blood running in the streets of Newark like there has never been anywhere else in America. Once the riot started, one War on Poverty official was arrested for firing a rifle from a car window, and another, Willie Wright, declared, quote, complete chaos will have to prevail in the streets of American cities, and blood will have to flow like water before the black man will become an accepted citizen. Just a 6-shooter won't be enough. Get yourself a machine gun, 'cause you are going to need it. Later, Shriver contended that Wright could not be fired because he was hired at the local level. Mayor Thomas Whalen of nearby Jersey City testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee that while the riot was still in progress in Newark, former OEO employee Rap Brown was invited by Roy Kinnix, a poverty worker of Jersey City, to speak on a program sponsored by the Council of Churches, which runs a $42,000 OEO program. Brown told the audience, "You built the city, go out and burn it down." However, the effort to incite devastation in Jersey City failed when Mayor Whalen announced that Jersey City police would move instantly with maximum force and that the city government would have no mercy on the lawless. According to Mayor Whalen's testimony, the war on poverty was, quote, funding and fueling and feeding people who, in my opinion, want Jersey City to erupt into a riot. On December 23, 1967, police in New Haven, Connecticut, arrested 5 men, 2 of whom were war on poverty workers who, according to the New Haven Register, planned to, quote, break the back of law and order in New Haven through the liquidation of top police officials and the destruction of the city's police headquarters, several schools, banks, and other public buildings. A number of machine guns and a large amount of dynamite were confiscated during the arrest. If you resent the fact that your tax money is being used to finance the destruction of the United States, you will be accused of being heartless and hating the poor. The war on poverty has become a sacred cow, almost immune from criticism because of its laudatory proclaimed purpose. But the war on poverty has not helped the poor. It hurts them. The money being spent is used primarily to pay the salaries of bureaucrats, many of whom are revolutionaries. How are the poor helped when their neighborhoods are burned down and job-providing businesses are destroyed or forced to move out? The war on poverty has become a war on America. The billions wasted on the war on poverty promote rebellion out of the frustration engendered when the government's wild promises of a federally guaranteed paradise cannot be fulfilled. In their frustration, the poor turn to the Marxist and black nationalist revolutionaries in the belief that violence holds the only key to their salvation. It was designed for that purpose by Marxists like Harrington and Yarmolinsky. Since monies are controlled by other Marxists like Augustus Hawkins, is it surprising that the war on poverty is being used to foment revolution in our streets? There has never been a thorough investigation of the war on poverty. The examples we have given to you are but a few we have selected from the public record, but are undoubtedly a drop in the bucket to what could be turned up by a thorough investigation. But an investigation would not be enough. Although it would result in an encyclopedia of information on communist and black nationalist participation in the war on poverty, the results would undoubtedly be that many of the worst examples would be discharged or transferred, only to be replaced by others of the same philosophy. It is obvious that the war on poverty is intended and was intended from its beginning to provide the financial bulwark for revolution. There is no way to clean it up. Changing the cast of characters will serve only to put the American public back to sleep. If the war on poverty were truly intended to help the poor, why aren't the funds given directly to them with as little administration as possible? Although there are few people who could even admit having seen one starving person in this country, nevertheless, a presidential commission recently released a report which stated that there are 10 million starving Americans in our land. If the $50 billion were directed to them, each would receive $5,000. In a family of 4, their total receipt would be $20,000. That would be a big step towards eliminating poverty and starvation. Since the time of the Presidential Commission's report, however, the House Agriculture Committee has released a 79-page report based on replies from health officials in 19 states. Their conclusion is that there is no actual starvation in the United States. Rather, there is malnutrition, caused largely by ignorance. Further, they stated that, quote, the few reported cases of starvation which had occurred in the past were believed to have resulted from deliberate negligence by parents. The problem is not that we lack the resources or the desire to end poverty. The problem is the government which, through graft, waste, and demagoguery, is actually causing the poverty it claims so enthusiastically it wants to end. But there is a war on poverty that works, America has fewer poor than any other nation in the world simply because our founding fathers so strictly regulated and limited government that they left the American citizen free, with virtually no limitations on his ability to produce or his right to control his own private property and means of production. Rather than extract $50 billion a year from the tax-paying producers and financing revolutionaries in our streets, these monies should be left in the hands of the private citizen to be spent on consumer goods, privately rebuilding cities, private education, medicine, and investment. This $50 billion a year would buy a big war on poverty. The one and only resort open to moral and productive Americans is to cut the malignant revolutionaries from our body politic by taking away from them the sustenance upon which they thrive, our tax money. What can you do? First, you can read the well-documented books and pamphlets exposing the fraud that is called the War on Poverty, such as Gary Allen's article, War on Poverty, Millions to Finance Revolution, from the February 1968 issue of American Opinion, Pass the Poverty, Please, by Joyce Winger and Patty Newman, and Poverty is Where the Money Is, by Shirley Shibla. You can arrange for your friends, neighbors, relatives, and organizations to which you belong to see this film strip. Second, you can encourage your congressman to eliminate this force for destruction in our country since they allocate the funds for the war on poverty. Each year, congressmen receive tens of thousands of letters from an organized letter-writing campaign by left-wing groups supporting the revolutionary war on poverty. This must be counteracted by an even bigger avalanche of letters from informed and concerned citizens who understand what the war on poverty is doing to America. If America continues to finance her own destruction by raining dollars upon those who advocate the overthrow of the government, the burning of our cities, and the killing of our policemen, America will sink into anarchy. The law-abiding will be at the mercy of criminal revolutionaries seeking to destroy this country so that the world communist conspiracy will have eliminated the United States, their last roadblock to world domination. Only you and thousands of other Americans can stop the financing of our own destruction. Fulfill the responsibilities of your citizenship by advising your congressman of the situation and asking him to influence possible to use your tax dollars to build and defend America, not to destroy her.